Hello everyone, and welcome to the LTA address, where we'll be retroing Split 1 and looking ahead to the rest of the year. We know Split 1 didn't hit the mark for a lot of fans, and honestly, we agree. First, we'll break down the changes we're making based on what we learned from Split 1. Then, we'll dive into these topics and more from the community to address the biggest talking points and how we're improving moving forward. Let's kick things off with some format changes. Split 1 was designed as a fast-paced tournament, whereas Split 2 and 3 were structured more as longer traditional splits. Even if Split 1 was supposed to be a type of kickoff tournament for the league, we understand it was too short, and we'll rework future Split 1s. Split 2 and 3 were already longer splits, but we think we can do better, especially with Fearless being rolled forward globally. Originally, Split 2 was designed as a traditional spring split with double round-robin best-of-1 format, leading into a top-6 playoffs. Early in splits, best-of-1s have a role to help teams play against more opponents early on in the split every day to engage their fans. However, 7 weeks of best-of-1s no longer felt like the right approach with Fearless. We're adjusting the regular season to have 3 weeks of best-of-1s to start, and then weeks 4 through 7 will become best-of-3s to ensure we have that champion diversity and also address the community's request for more best-of-3s. Here's how the new format works. Weeks 1 through 3 will be a single round-robin best-of-1 called the positioning phase. These will create standings for 2 groups of 4 and work as tiebreakers when needed. Weeks 4 through 6 is the group stage, with best-of-3 matches within the 2 groups. These groups will be constructed using a snake system. Week 7 is cross-group battles, where the top 2 teams play for seeding, while the bottom 2 teams in each group play elimination matches, leading into our top 6 full Fearless playoff, where all the matches played are best-of-5. Now, moving on to Split 3, which introduces the pick-and-play system, where teams select their opponents each week. As Split 3 was already series play, the changes are more straightforward. We're just changing all the elimination phase matches to be best-of-5s. After Split 1, we want to guarantee that fans see multiple full Fearless best-of-5s during conference play, and to ensure that the teams facing elimination get one last stand in a full series. These changes will result in more days and games, giving teams more time on stage and fans more opportunities to watch meaningful matchups. On a similar topic to format, fans of both conferences commented on the current competitive gap between North and South teams. To be honest, the gap between NA, LATAM, and Brazil has existed for a long time, and closing it was never going to be a single split solution, but our vision was to achieve that over time. One of the steps we're taking is to introduce additional boot camp between splits 2 and 3. The top 3 South teams who don't qualify for MSI will be flown to LA for a boot camp to help them prepare for Split 3. This was always something on our to-do list, but decided to announce it early so fans know we're committed to making the LTA a competitively driven ecosystem. With the new format changes, Riot also made some adjustments to broadcast schedules to better optimize for fans and engagement. The global ecosystem changes in 2025 resulted in a historic amount of overlap between broadcasts, making it harder for some fans around the world to watch LoL Esports. We'll talk viewership in part 2 since that was also a very big community topic, but long story short, we don't want to make fans pick between 2 products. Now for some quick hits. We're rolling forward our streaming scrims policy from Split 1 with one new addition. Teams can now scrim Tier 2 teams as long as it doesn't conflict with that team's Tier 2 schedule. Hoping to see some near airport scrims soon. The start of Tier 2 also kicks off the road to promo relegation, which will take place right after Split 3. Lastly, the LTA Fantasy app is coming along nicely. It's set to launch before Split 2 begins. This will be closer to daily fantasy sports, where players set lineups using a budget that changes week over week. We'll walk you through a full tutorial when that launches, but for now, let's set up for the deep dive. Welcome to my desk. For this section, we collected feedback from fans and formulated it into some key questions that we'll address head on. Now, I know the topics, obviously, but I asked the team to rewrite them in a way that is authentic to fans' emotions, so let's dive in. That format sucked. Yes, well, on the plus side, Split 2 and 3 were already different, but we agree that format didn't land the way that we wanted to, so let's get into some reasons for that. As you can see, I came prepared. So whenever designing a format, you're basically going to have 2 big buckets of things that all of your decisions will fall under. The first one is goals, and the second one is constraints. Now, constraints is easier, so we'll start there. The first one is resources. That's going to be how many people you can assign to a project, how much money it's going to cost, these sorts of things. You have time, and in this case, Split 1 was shorter than Split 2 and 3, so you're going to have less time to run formats and these sorts of things. And last is qualification. I apologize for my handwriting, it's truly terrible. But for example, split one only needs to send one team to first stand versus Worlds will send 3 teams. So you're gonna have different kind of ends to your format. Now to goals. So here are a handful of goals that we had for split one, for example. We wanted to get to the Americas stage to show off this cross-conference competition. That was one of the new big features for the LTA, but we still wanted to have conference play to make sure that people saw their favorite teams playing against each other and we didn't jump straight into it. We wanted to obviously launch a new league, which is a huge thing. There's new conferences, new branding, all these sorts of things. But we also wanted to lean into the new season of League of Legends and show off Welcome to Noxus, the new modes, the new champs, and all the things that we typically do. And then we also wanted to make sure that we were giving opportunities for these cross-conference moments to show off the competition and give teams an opportunity to level up. And what you quickly realize as you start working through these is that some of these goals conflict. So in order to show off the Americas stage of play, and we want to get there quickly, that means you need to eliminate teams from the conference stage of play quickly, which means those teams might not be viewed enough by their fans. When you're launching a new league, obviously that's going to take a lot of branding moments, but you'll want to take some of those resources that you have and commit them to showing off the game and sport and these different things. And when you talk about qualification, technically we only need to qualify one team to first stand. So the simplest solution would have been just take the 2 winners of the 2 conferences and pit them against each other. But that wouldn't really help our goal of competition. So that's why we made the choice to take 4 teams from the north and send them to the south for 2 weeks of competition so that even if some teams get eliminated from the south, they'll still be in that environment, scrimming, practicing, getting exposure and all these sorts of things, also to the fans. And so all of these goals sound really good in paper, but when you start putting them up against each other, you have to start pulling resources and time and all these things away from them, and you end up under-delivering on a lot of them. And that's, I think, the way that we ended up in a little bit of trouble in split one for fans, is we wanted to do all of these things, didn't quite have the ability to get all of them done, felt a little flat on some of them. And so in the future, when designing split ones and these sorts of things, we'll make sure we really deliver on just a couple of these goals that are most important for that split and not try and make everything happen if it's ultimately going to be coming at the cost of these other things. Obviously, for split 2 and 3, this is a similar world, but it's going to be a lot better, we think, because in split 2, we're just focused on conference play and making sure that fans get to connect to their favorite teams and players. In split 3, we'll have more of the Americas stage focus, but also we'll be qualifying 3 teams to Worlds, and you'll see a lot more cool stuff then. So we're very confident with the next 2 formats going forward for split 2 and 3, but we're always listening, and that's one of the reasons that we did make those changes that we announced in part 1. That's it for the whiteboard. On to the next question. This one says that North teams dominated the South in cross-conference play, so what is the LTA doing to actually help the South improve? Why are seeds not given based solely on competition? So like we said in some of the earlier parts, our expectation was not competitive parity right away just based off of history. Our belief was that with more cross-conference play and investment, we would start to see improvements over time. And this is reflected in our competitive structures. Like we mentioned in that previous section, it would have been easy to just send the winners of each conference together, but we wanted the 4 North teams in the South scrimming, having multiple partners, multiple weeks, these sorts of things. And so these moments are great and a lot of fun, but they often kind of just serve as data points as well. And so that's why we're introducing the boot camps between the splits to give teams an opportunity to level up and work on their strategies, close that gap, focus more on that than who they're necessarily playing that next week coming up in competition. It also gives more opportunities than to just a single team, and not at the end of splits where then you go on break, but actually at the beginning of a split where then you can transition that right into the split. On to the second part of this topic around the seeding. You can see at international play, for example, that there's always a balance of representation and competition. Every single one of the 5 major regions now got 3 seeds at Worlds, 2 at MSI, 1 at First Stand. And from that alone, you can see how much Riot values representation for engaging fandoms of international competition. Only Korea and China have won Worlds recently, and twice for the LCK 4th seed. So you can see that, yeah, obviously from a competitive standpoint, you can make the same argument there, but we give out the same number of seeds to each of the major regions. And that same philosophy is how we kind of divided up the LTA to make sure that the whole of Americas is engaged in this first launch year. If we earned it strictly through competition, it was possible that one of the conferences would not see international play all year long as we launched this new league, which we did not want. That said, we are always working to make sure that we have a competitive ecosystem, and so we're taking those actions to ensure that going forward. We expect the South to become more competitive with the North over time, because at the end of the day, this is a sport, and we're going to monitor this gap over time and make sure that our formats are always reflecting what's best for the entire region. I hate best of ones. That is not a question, that's a statement. But definitely understand it's been a hot topic in a long time in the community, so we'll talk about it again. We've talked about it before in some of the previous videos, and Best of ones are generally better for the start of a product. Teams play against each other more often. You get more narratives developed. They're playing every single day. They're helping smooth out the viewership curve, cross-pollinate audiences between different fandoms, and allowing easier content opportunities. And this is crucial for the league, especially in the launch, to promote all these teams to the wider audience and make all these things happen. And just as an example of how this can matter, I actually have a beautiful bar chart, which is the opening weekend viewership as a percentage. So the day one is at the top at 100% if you're comparing it to AMA for that day versus the second day, and what the drop-off is between day one and day two. So this was spring last year with best of ones, and it was about a 10% drop-off going from 100% day one to 90% day two. And then for best of threes, you can see it's a lot more dramatic. In summer last year, you have this about a 20% fall off, and a little bit even more dramatic here in the launch of LTA Split 1, which was also 2 best of threes a day, and you can see again that bigger drop off. And our concern with that, and what we're trying to fight against, is making sure that fans are tuning in for the entire league and having the opportunity to see all these new players as they make their debut, especially given that we have new teams in the league who people might not be as familiar with, and so we want to have them have that opportunity to play against everyone. That said, like we said before, that 7 weeks of best of ones, which was the initial plan, didn't really match with Fearless and the viewer fatigue that might happen with a stagnant meta and seeing the same picks over and over again, which is why we're making that pivot to have more best of threes in the middle of the split. And it's just these 3 weeks of best of ones, and then they're gone for the rest of the year, and we're in best of threes and best of fives for the rest of the time. LTA Norte viewership looked rough. What is being done about that? So honestly, the viewership was a little underwhelming for our own expectations for Split 1, but I think when we go into this analysis, you'll kind of see why there's plenty of reasons to not worry too much. Starting off, though, that viewership is always tricky to compare to previous years, but with the fundamental changes to the format, having 3 splits, having a different audience base, it's going to be difficult to track all this. Our Split 2 obviously maps very closely to spring, Split 3 maps to summer, but Split 1 is a whole new beast. And so we're going to prefer to analyze this split over split because we have pretty good historical precedence for this trend, knowing how a league ends and then relaunches at the start of the next year. Typically, you would see a 10 to 20% drop off per split, and then at the start of the new year, that 10 to 20% will come back at the start of the new year. And so the LCS have been in a slide for a while now, and when we look at the surface level numbers, we do see Split 1 does have that typical healthy jump in this graph. Candidly, though, this is disingenuous to the new structure of the LTA, and so we want to slice this data fairly. And so what we're going to do is isolate the conference stage to the first 3 weeks and compare that directly to summer in 2024. And for that reason, it's 2 best of threes a day, and just kind of isolating that. And in that view, we see that we still have a 3.5% increase, but it's more realistic. And as we mentioned in part 1, we actually saw way more overlaps than typical. And just to show some of the effects of that, I have another handy dandy chart. The red line is summer from last year in best of threes in a 6-game day, and the blue line is from this year. And you can see that the blue line in game 1 was starting at 50% of what was our AMA per game. So that this is at 100% your most viewed game. Game 1 is starting 50% lower, which is significantly lower than what is standard. And then even by game 2, it's still lower than what was the starting point in summer. And then the game 3, when we're finally in the clear, that's where we're hitting our peak where we're expected to. And then, the next series starts and people tune out after a long 3-game series. So all that is to say that a lot of these things were starting lower. And so we expect with clearing up some of the schedules that we'll have a lot better viewership reflected. And that 3.5% would be in that 10 to 20% range had we not had all these conflicts. The other thing to talk about is playoff viewership, which grew, but it was kind of inverse of a typical playoff ramp up due to the cross-conference viewership. The real pain points there were starting at 11 a.m. versus 1 p.m., so a change up on short notice for the North American audience who was competing in the actual finals, as well as the lack of double elimination or best of fives didn't have that natural kind of ramp up cadence that you would see with a longer playoffs. And split 2 and 3 changes should address most of this. We're confident that the viewership will absolutely bounce back when we take all of these things into consideration. That wraps it up. We want to take a moment to genuinely thank all the teams and fans for sticking with us through Split 1. We know we can do better, but we learned a lot, and your feedback has been invaluable in shaping what comes next for the LTA. Our goal is to always build something great for players, teams, and fans alike, and while we're still refining things, we're committed to that improvement every step of the way. We're excited to see what's ahead and can't wait to kick off Split 2 with all of you. We'll be listening and learning and finding new ways to improve and grow together. Thanks for being a part of this journey, and see you opening day.